Hey everybody, welcome to the video. My final thoughts for week 7 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look video we do earlier in the week. And I'll have lineup building and core plays ready to go tomorrow if you do want to check those out. But if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, you can official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Spreadsheets, ownership projections, optimizers for all sports, including NBA, which did start, which has been going quite well so far. Link can be found down below. Last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you. Versus the projections, there's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're new signing up on PrizePicks, you get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. Want to use it to your advantage. When you use code Pennell, tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I gotta be honest, I don't think it's super deep this week. There was a couple of value plays like Tua or Matt Ryan that don't grade out too poorly in projections, but I think these four are definitely above the rest of the field this weekend, so it looks like I'm going to be spending a little bit of money for a quarterback this weekend. So we'll have to find some value elsewhere, but I think we can definitely do that. But starting up top, we have a good tournament option in Kyler Murray, $8,500. I say tournament option because they're just massive favorites versus Houston, so I really don't think it's going to be a back and forth affair, which when I roster quarterbacks, I typically want a tight spread. Like for Patrick Mahomes, a 5-point spread, Lamar Jackson, 6.5-point spread. That is perfectly fine. 17.5 points, it does worry me a bit, especially in the second half, but if they are blowing out the Texans, it's probably because Kyler Murray already had a big game. So even if we don't get much of anything in like the late third or fourth quarter, I still think Kyler Murray can be an excellent option here, $8,500. I mean, he's been great this year. He had like one bad game where he had 13, 14 fantasy points, but besides that, I mean, Kyler's been one of the best quarterbacks in football this season. The Texans obviously don't pose much of a threat defensively. They're 20th versus quarterbacks this season, despite being 11th DVA versus the run. But the Cardinals should have no problem whatsoever. DeAndre Hopkins' revenge game, and I mean, there's plenty of weapons for Kyler Murray to get the ball too, so I think he's just fine. Patrick Mahomes, $8,400. I'm currently projecting him to be the second highest owned quarterback, only behind Lamar Jackson this weekend. Kyler Murray, like 4th or 5th, right behind the guys we're going to talk about. So that's why I think Kyler Murray is definitely a tournament option because he's going to have lower ownership, but just I think there's valid concerns there. They do have a 32.5 implied team total though, but Patrick Mahomes in a 5-point spread versus Tennessee in a game that features a 57-point over-under, which is by far the highest on the entire slate, definitely looks a lot more appealing, especially when he's $100 cheaper. And as stacking options, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are going to be much popular, averaging over 300 passing yards per game this year, 3 passing touchdowns. Is throwing a lot of interceptions, some of them not his fault. Last week in the red zone, ball right off of Tyreek Hill's hands turned into an interception, but I don't think anyone's questioning Mahomes' ability this season. He hasn't really had a bad game yet fantasy-wise. This is a dream matchup versus Tennessee. 27th DVA versus the pass, 26 versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 300 passing yards per game. They don't have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know Darrell Williams filled in quite nicely last week, over 20 total touches, but this is a team that wants to throw the football, and they should definitely have success versus the Tennessee Titans doing just that. Also, Mahomes offers you a little bit of rushing upside as well, which doesn't hurt the floor. And speaking of quarterbacks that offer you a rushing floor, Lamar Jackson at $7,400. If you rostered Lamar last week, you probably still have a bad taste in your mouth because he definitely busted hard. Only 13-some fantasy points through 2 interceptions. Just didn't really do too much. Only had 1 touchdown. But we can't expect 3 Ravens running backs to score touchdowns once again. Le'Veon Bell, Devonta Freeman, and Latavius Murray all got into the end zone last week. I don't see that happening again. Like, Lamar is just not going to. If the Ravens are going to score 34 points again, Lamar is not going to only have 1 touchdown. I just don't see that happening. And $7,400 is a steal for Lamar Jackson because besides that game, he didn't really have a game worse than 20 fantasy points. I mean, the rushing upside is there every single week, over 6 yards per carry. 65 rushing yards per game, which is pretty much a built-in 1.5 to 2 passing touchdown floor, just what he does on the ground. Obviously, always a threat around the goal line. And while the Bengals have been kind of stingy versus quarterbacks this year, allowing the 7th fewest points per game in their 8th DVA versus the pass, I'm just not concerned. The matchups don't really matter too much for Lamar. He's been excellent this season. He's got Mark Andrews, Hollywood. Bateman came back last week. He had 6 targets. And he's averaging close to 300 passing yards per game this year. I know it's a small sample size, and that one game versus Indy is probably beefing it up a little bit, but team total above 26. I think Lamar's an excellent option to go back to in cash games this week, and I'm currently projecting him to be the chalk quarterback. Although it's not like it's a massive chalk, it's kind of close to Patrick Mahomes, and I could see that switching throughout the week depending on which way people want to go with roster construction, but I definitely think Lamar's in a good bounce back spot. Matthew Stafford, $7,100. He's been excellent all season long, and the Rams are definitely the top stack on the entire slate. 33-point implied team total, but similar to the Cardinals, I do worry about a blowout here, 15.5-point favorites at home, so this game could obviously go quite south for the Detroit Lions very quick, but I mean, I'd be surprised if the Rams don't put up close to 40 points here, and I think the entire offense is in play. Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Darrell Henderson, heck, even Van Jefferson or Tyler Higbee, I think are playable. Even Deshaun Jackson, if you want to get absolutely nuts. But Stafford's been excellent this year. Over 300 passing yards per game, over 2.5 passing touchdowns, 9.2 yards per attempt. I just mentioned all the weapons that he has in Detroit. Pretty much the worst defense in football. I know they're not the worst so far, numbers-wise, but I mean, they got some really bad pieces out there. 25th DVA versus the pass, 17th versus quarterbacks. It's so easy to run on them. So some of their passing numbers don't look as bad as they could be because people just obviously run in Detroit, which I think Darrell Henderson's a fantastic play this weekend. But Stafford should have no problem whatsoever, and those Matthew Stafford Cooper Kupp lineups can be quite deadly this weekend. And moving on to the running back position, again, not super deep. It's a 10-game slate, so it's not like we're going to have an abundance of options at each and every single position. But we'll start top with the big dog, Derrick Henry, $9,200. If you have the money for him, one of the best plays in the entire slate. The only reason why I'm not saying Derrick Henry is a lock this week is he gets a great spot versus KC Swiss Cheese defense, especially versus the run. I mean, they suck versus the pass too, but it's been terrible versus the run for a couple years now. It's because we have 3 stud wide receivers and about the 3 best matchups you can ask for, so there's definitely tough decisions to be made up top this week. And from my experience when building lineups so far in the optimizer, just hand building, I cannot fit Derrick Henry with one of those wide receivers unless I punt the quarterback and punt at some other positions, which you can make work, but I don't really want to punt quarterback often this week, so it's really a tough choice between either Derrick Henry or those star wide receivers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Henry's in a great spot versus KC. What Tennessee's going to want to do is just run the ball, keep Patrick Mahomes off the field, which I know is easier said than done, but the guy's just killing it this year. The Bills were first DVOA in allowing the fewest points per game to running back position last week, and Derrick Henry goes out and scores 3 touchdowns and has close to 40 DraftKings points. Like, he's the volume king, 27 rushing attempts per game, over 130 rushing yards, close to 2 rushing touchdowns per game, which is insane, nearly 5 yards per carry, getting less than 3 targets per game. The targets are coming down. He still had 2 targets last week, but target share close to 10%, which is about double of what he's had in the past, so it's still a boost nonetheless. And the Chiefs are 31st DVA versus the run, 23rd versus running backs. They're also getting 55.5 receiving yards per game to the position, really is in Derrick Henry's department, but they still be getting shutted by that, so maybe we get a couple screens or dump offs to Derrick Henry, which can help boost his floor. Just a super expensive price point, but I would not be surprised if he gets an easy 120 plus and multiple rushing touchdowns in this game. I mean, he's one of the safest bets in fantasy football each and every single week because of that volume. Aaron Jones, $7,500. He's an 8-point favorite at home versus Green Bay. And if a lot of people are playing guys like Darrell Henderson, Leonard Fournette, and Derrick Henry, I'm hoping Aaron Jones goes a little bit overlooked because this is a pretty good spot. Everyone and their mom's going to play Devontae Adams this week. Washington has been terrible versus wide receivers, and they're facing the best wide receiver in football, so there's no reason not to like Devontae Adams this week, even though he busted last week. But Aaron Jones himself is in a very good spot. When he was involved in the pass game, he's still getting the majority of the touches at the running back position. Not quite Derrick Henry volume, but most people can't say they get close to Derrick Henry volume, so I'm not going to fault him for that. But there should be plenty of scoring opportunities. He's got over a 12% target share. He gets a lot of receiving touchdowns, too. He's close to receiving touchdown per game this year, and Washington's 18th versus running backs, despite being 12th DVA versus the run. So I think Aaron Jones is definitely a good spot if you can't quite afford Derrick Henry. You want exposure to the Green Bay Packers. Henderson, $6,600. He's your chalk running back of the week. He literally checks each and every single box for me. They have a 33-point implied team total, which is the highest on the slate. He's a 15.5-point favorite. He's playing at home. He's on the field for the majority of the touches, and he's involved in the passing game. Like, that checks literally each and every single box. I have nothing bad to say about Darrell Henderson. He was great last week. He was involved in the passing game, had a receiving touchdown at the seam, averaging 4.6 yards per carry. And the Lions are 26 DVA versus the run, and allowing the second most points per game to the running back position, 33.5 points per game. So Darrell Henderson, I love him in all aspects. I think he is by far the best running back play on the entire slate, point per dollar-wise. Leonard Fournette, $6,400. He's also in a very good spot. He checks a lot of boxes. He's a 12.5-point favorite. He's playing at home. They have a team total close to 30. He's involved in the passing game, and he gets the majority of the touches. Like, he's pretty much the same exact play as Darrell Henderson. Just the matchup versus Chicago isn't quite as good, but he's on a good offense, and there should be plenty of scoring opportunities. Probably going to have 20-plus total touches. He's been playing great so far this year. The numbers don't look quite as good as they have been because he's been getting a lot more touches recently. So if all goes well, I think we could probably expect close to 20 rushing attempts here for Leonard Fournette. Now, I'd be very surprised if he does not get to the end zone. And the big thing here is that he's quite involved in the passing game, 5 targets per game, which is 11.5% target share, which is not bad for a running back on a team that throws the ball a ton with guys like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown on the team. While the Bears are kind of stingy fantasy point-wise versus running backs, they're still 23rd DVA versus the run, giving it close to 100 rushing yards per game. So loving Leonard Fournette quite a bit. Similar play to Darrell Henderson. Henderson grades out better for me just because of the matchup, but Fournette's right there with them. Chuba Hubbard, $6,100. Good matchup here versus the Giants, 27 DVA versus the run, 26 versus running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed per game, and over 122 rushing yards. He gets pretty much all the touches, no Rodney Smith, so he's involved in the passing game. He's the main rushing back, so kind of hard not to like Chuba Hubbard here as a 3-point favorite for Carolina. Down to $6,000. don't really even care what he does on the ground these days. It's like his role through the passing game. Like, he's going to get you like 6 to 10 targets each and every single week. He's got close to a 20% target share in the season, close to 7 targets per game for the receiving yards. You're pretty much getting a RB2 with a wide receiver 2 mixed in, so quite safe because of that passing volume on a PPR site like DraftKings. And if you are stacking the Rams, there's not many good run back options on the Lions, but DeAndre Swift actually works out just because of how involved he's in the passing game, so I don't mind Swift whatsoever this week. As a 15.5 point dog on the road, so you get plenty of dump offs. And Darrell Williams, $5,100. I prefer the passing attack a lot more than I like the rushing attack for KC. But Williams, you can't ignore the volume last week. I think he had 22 or 24 carries, also had 3 or 4 targets. So the volume is certainly there. He's a 5-point favorite, 31-point implied team total. Got into the end zone multiple times last week. Would not be surprised if that happens once again. And I think he's a decent pivot because, like I said, everyone likes the passing attack. Tyreek Hill, though he's a bit banged up. Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, Patrick Mahomes. People will probably skip over Darrell Williams a little bit, which he wasn't that chalky last week, and I could see a similar scenario this weekend once again. And if you're looking for the leverage pivot, you can always play the run game here in KC. And moving on to the wide receiver position, I try to keep this as simple as possible because it really just depends on what quarterback you're using or what stack you're using because we want to correlate our wide receivers with our quarterbacks. So if you have Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill here at $8,600, Mecole Hardman at $4,300, they pair nicely with Patrick Mahomes. You want pass catching options with them. There's some guys where you don't really need the quarterback in cash games just because they're fine one-offs, like Davante Adams. You don't need to play Aaron Rodgers because the ball really only goes to Davante Adams. So you can pretty much soak up all those points through Adams, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford. He pairs nicely with Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, or even Tyler Higbee if you want to use him as a pass-catching option. DJ Moore's fine as a one-off. I mean, great matchup versus the Giants. They don't really have anybody that can guard him. Calvin Ridley, if you're using Matt Ryan. I think Calvin Ridley you can get away with as a one-off just because of the price point this week, and you should see heavy volume. And Miami's a pretty good matchup, but it's really hard to trust the Falcons' offense, but he's obviously the guy you want with Matt Ryan, or unless you're using Kyle Pitts. Robert Woods we already talked about with Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. A.J. Brown, $6,300. I think he's a fine run back option because sometimes you don't have to pair the wide receiver with the quarterback. You can use him as a run back option. So let's say you have Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill. You can run it back with A.J. Brown. Assuming they're playing from behind, they're going to throw the ball quite a bit. And A.J. Brown could definitely eat up this KC defense. It is ranked 31st DVA versus the pass. Jamar Chase, if you're stacking up the Ravens like Lamar Jackson with a cheap option like Rashad Bateman or Marquise Hollywood Brown or Mark Andrews, whoever it may be, he's a good run back option with how good he's been so far this season. The Bengals will probably be playing from behind a 6.5 point dogs on the road here. Chris Godwin is a fantastic cash game play this weekend. Don't think you have to play him with Tom Brady for playing cash games. $5,900 for a guy that gets a ton of targets in this offense. Antonio Brown is currently questionable. He has not really been practicing too much with that ankle issue. So if he happens to be out, massive boost for Chris Godwin. And obviously Mike Evans, but being below $6,000 here, really hard not to like Chris Godwin here with a 30-point implied team total, a guy that's getting over 7 targets per game. I know it's only a 17.5% target share, but there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. But if AB happens to be out, obviously opens up a lot of room for guys to get extra targets. Marquise Brown, we kind of already talked about. Jalen Waddle, $5,600, getting 8 targets per game, 23% target share. Good matchup versus Atlanta. Don't hate him as just a mid-range play. Sterling Shepard at $5,600. Looks like Kadarius Toney's going to be out, and everyone else is pretty much banged up, and I could see him getting a lot of targets. Once again, he had 14 targets last week, getting 9 targets per game so far in the games that he's played, which is close to a 24% target share. He's fine just from a necessity standpoint. The Giants are going to have to get the ball to somebody. Mecole Hardman, just kind of a cheaper version of Tyreek Hill. Obviously not quite as good, but he is getting plenty of targets each and every single week to make him viable enough at that price point. And Tyreek Hill, if he happens to not play, I know we didn't practice yesterday, although I think he did the same thing last week on Thursday. I'm assuming he's good to go, but if he's not, Mecole Hardman becomes a must-play at $4,300, and the best matchup we can ask for is a wide receiver. And then Rashad Bateman here at $3,400 in his debut, had 6 targets, was quite involved, and posted a 22% target share. So $3,400, I mean, if they keep ramping him up, I think that's actually a very strong price point, and he's just a cheap pairing option with Lamar Jackson this weekend. But really, the question is this week, who do you want to play up top? Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, or Cooper Kupp? All these guys find themselves in some of the best matchups you can ask for. I know Cooper Kupp here, it says Detroit's 9th versus wide receivers, but it's just been so easy to run them that you don't really have to do too much damage to the air versus Detroit, but they have nobody that can guard Cooper Kupp. Tyreek Hill, Titans are dead last versus wide receivers, and Davante Adams against Washington, who is second to dead last versus wide receivers. So you really can't go wrong with any of these guys up top. Then you got to throw Derrick Henry in the mix because you really can't play like an Adams with Derrick Henry this weekend. It's just nearly impossible because we don't have a ton of just super cheap free squares like Ricky Seals-Jones at $2,500 or things like that this weekend. So probably have to make some tough decisions up top. I really don't think you can go wrong with any of them because they should also. And moving on to the tight end position, it's pretty much just a bunch of expensive guys or Ricky Seals-Jones down low. There's a couple guys like Jonnu Smith, I think, is $2,000 if you want just a cheap pump play versus the Jets. He is there. I would say just throw in whoever fits, to be honest. But Travis Kelce, if you're spending top dollar, obviously the guy you want. The Titans have been, I guess, stingy versus tight ends this year, but if people are going to get away from Travis Kelce just because the Titans are second versus tight ends this year, by all means, I want to play more Travis Kelce because that does not matter. Like, they have not faced Travis Kelce this year. He is a wide receiver out there, nearly 9 targets per game, 23% target share, 80 yards receiving per game. I mean, nothing bad at all to say about Travis Kelce in the game that features the highest over-under in the entire slate. Darren Waller gets the volume, just isn't on quite a prolific offense as the Chiefs, but I mean, hard to argue against. 8.67 targets per game, which is the exact same that Travis Kelce has. 24% target share, 25% market share of the team's air yards. Kelce-like numbers, just not on quite as exciting of an offense. Mark Andrews, if you're using Lamar, he's been great so far this year, half a receiving touchdown per game. Similar numbers in terms of targets, or target share, I should say, to Darren Waller and Travis Kelce with a 23.66% target share, similar market share of the team's air yards, and a similar weighted opportunity share, and exactly the same exact receiving yards per game as Travis Kelce, so you really can't go wrong with any of these three options. And if you're looking for a punt guy, Ricky Seals-Jones, $3,700, still Logan Thomas, so he's going to be running all the routes, all the snaps, 8-point dogs here, should be throwing the ball quite a bit. And if you're using Green Bay players like Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, he's a fine run back option for cheap. Had a nice long touchdown last week. The price keeps rising, but it's still probably a bit too cheap. He should probably be around $5,000. So the fact that he's not, still think he's a pretty darn good value at only $3,700. Assuming he's good to go. I believe he's currently questionable, but I don't think he's not going to play. Then moving on to the defense here, just a bunch of mid-range defenses that are favorites. Patriots, $3,400 versus the Jets. They're 7-point favorites at home. Packers are 8-point favorites versus Washington. The Cardinals will be your chalk defense of the week. They're currently my highest projected defense points-wise by quite a big margin. And they're only $3,100. They're 17.5-point favorites for the 15-point implied team total against them at home. So really hard not to like the Cardinals here versus the Houston Texans. Then we have the Ravens, who pretty much shut out the Los Angeles Chargers last week. 6.5-point favorites at home here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. If I'm using Lamar, I probably don't want to use the Ravens defense because I want they can be back and forth, so it just wouldn't make too much sense correlation-wise, but they are fine at $2,800. And if you want a dirt cheap option, the Eagles are at $2,300, which I think are just fine. They shouldn't get killed versus the Raiders. With that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, I'm an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. NBA, NFL, I guess the movie's pretty much over, but we still have some NASCAR left, so lots of extra content over there that I think you guys would enjoy. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. Just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new signing over there, you get a free money bonus. It's deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. Want to use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling, and I will see you guys on Saturday for the lineup building and core plays videos.